Porch Talks aren't just a podcast. They're a part of our lives. We carry them with us wherever we go. These are the honest late-night talks with friends who know all of our hearts and still won't leave us. These are the tearful moments of reconciliation with beloved parents whom we've hurt or have hurt us. These are the moments in relationship where we're confused about exactly where we stand with Jesus. These are the bouts of frustration and hurt and mistrust that we harbor when we talk about the beautiful love of God. These are the Porch Talks, and they're ours.
Hey y'all, it's Jenny, and these are the Porch Talks. Last night we did the story of Rahab the Prostitute and two spies. Her story begins when Joshua sends two spies into the city of Jericho. And once in the city, the two spies enter the house of Rahab the Prostitute. The king of Jericho found out about the spies and sent a message to Rahab saying, "I know you've got the spies in your house and you need to bring them out." Here, Rahab the Prostitute had a choice. She could go the easy, more natural route and protect her city, or she could choose to follow the Lord, who she knows sent these two spies. So when it came time for her to choose, Rahab the Prostitute chose to side with God. She chose to fully put her faith in God, and she told the king's men, "The men were here, but I didn't know why, and I don't know where they went." Rahab lied to the bad guys to protect the good guys. Her radical faith was at the heart of her actions. After this, Rahab went upstairs, and three amazing things happened here. She believed with her heart. She told the spies that she knew that the Lord had given them this land, and that all those in the city of Jericho had been hearing what the Lord had been doing, and they were melting in fear. The only way that Rahab would know that the Lord had sent these spies was through revelation. God softened her heart. Rahab the prostitute not only heard from the Lord, she embraced his truth. She then made a bold confession of faith, saying, "I know that the Lord your God is the Lord of heaven above and on the earth below." Rahab the prostitute then put action to her faith. She told the spies the route for safety, and she told them where to hide out, and then she lowered the rope over the city wall. In all of that, Rahab the prostitute was saved by her faith and her confession. In Romans 10 it says, "It is with the heart that we believe and are justified, and it is with the mouth that we confess our faith and are saved." Rahab the prostitute believed in the Lord with all of her heart and made her confession of faith to the two men. In this, she was saved and stepped with radical faith into her role as a daughter of the Lord. Now, throughout all of this story, it's made pretty clear what Rahab's occupation was. Rahab was a prostitute. It is connected and bound with her name on 5 different occasions within the Bible. There's no attempt to cover up her past or to sugarcoat it. Her choices had consequences, and because of that, Rahab's reputation followed her. I'm imagining Rahab as giving up hope of ever being able to turn her life around and getting rid of that name. Rahab was a prostitute, but through her salvation and God's grace, she became an incredible woman of faith. Just like Rahab, I have a past and I have a name that follows me, Jenny the divorced. Before I had Jesus and before I had given my life to the Lord fully, I lived in the world and I chose to marry a man of the world. We both believed in God, and that was enough for me to check that box off my list. About a year into our marriage, I began to feel the tug from Jesus to come back to him, to follow him, to surrender to him. So I started searching for a church and came to find a church that I could call home. And in that church, I found a women's small group that changed my life by pointing me to Jesus and showing me what it meant to walk with God through both the peaks and the valleys. Through Jesus, I began to change. Not long after that, I found out my ex was a drug addict as I drove him to the hospital after he overdosed in our home. And it was then that I began a deep dive into the hardest valley of my life, trying to save my marriage. Just like Rahab, I had 2 routes. I had an easy, instinctive route, and I had a route that seemed insurmountable in its challenges. Only one of those routes included Jesus. So for the next 2 years, I fought to stay in the light and the sanctity of marriage. I knew what the Bible was telling me about marriage, and I knew what was pleasing to God. And it wasn't until literally all of my options had been exhausted that I was able to clearly hear the Lord telling me that it was okay to find freedom in what my ex was asking for, a divorce. Prepare now for my marriage to an incredible man who is constantly pointing me to Jesus and is an immense spiritual leader in my life. That name and that identification temptation is following me. And even though I have freedom from the chains in that through Jesus, the shame and the hurt still sting when I am labeled as divorced. Last week, Josh and I went to go get our marriage license, and it was such an exciting afternoon as we walked into that building and began filling out the forms that would start our future together. I felt like I was overflowing with joy in the new life God had given me, until the question came asking if this was my first marriage. Instantly deflated, I had to answer no. And then as we moved to the next station, I realized that on our marriage license, on our piece of paper that was going to start our future and start our lives, next to my name in big, bold, capitalized letters, it said Jennifer Weaver, second marriage, divorced. In that moment, my shame slammed into me like a ton of bricks, and my internal chatterbox came crashing in, telling me that I'm not good enough, that I couldn't even earn the love and respect from a man who was more interested in drugs than other women. Who was I to think that I deserved a second chance at marriage and God's love and grace after such a massive failure? In that moment, I was Rahab, and I couldn't escape my past, and my past was defining me. Thankfully, Rahab's story didn't end there. There is one place in the Bible where her name is mentioned and it is not attached to the word prostitute. In Matthew 1, Rahab gets a new name in the direct lineage of Jesus. By surrendering her life and through her actions of faith, Rahab was given new life and washed clean of the sin that named her. There's a shift from Rahab the prostitute to Rahab the forgiven. And through that forgiveness, Rahab became a mother in the direct line of Christ. This is where this story speaks truth into my life. God turns my shame into glory for his name. His strength is made perfect in my weakness, and his grace is sufficient for me. God doesn't look at me and say, here's Jenny, look at who she was and what she did. God looks at me and he says, here's Jenny, my daughter, with whom I am well pleased. Thanks for listening, guys. These are the Porch Talks, and we'll see you next week.